Hello, everybody. The game that I'm about to show you was played last night between myself and a member of Metropolitan Chess Club in London. His name is Tanjay Deflesselle. Sorry, Deflesselle, I think. Again, I butcher pronunciations, so so don't take my word for it. But he is rated 201 ECF and 2146 FIDE. And my rating is 197 and 2089, I think, in FIDE. So the time control for this game was, for the first 30 moves, you had 60 minutes, 1 hour, and then after move 30 you would get 15 minutes extra to finish the whole game. So I was white and started with c4. Knight f6 was now played. g3. So I'm just setting up a basic English opening plan. Just fianchetto the bishop on g2 and control the light squares. So his structure is yet to be decided upon. He has lots of options and he chooses to fianchetto as well. Now, knight c3, it's just, I always try and play the moves that, play the obvious moves, play the moves you know you're going to play before the possible optional moves. That allows you to keep your choices more, you have more choices then, you can decide on a plan. But knight c3 is pretty much always played in the English. He castles, so he's also leaving his options open. He could play c5, c6, e6, e5, d6, lots and lots of options. And here I now choose a plan. I like this setup, e4. So what I'm doing is setting up the Botvinnik English system, a sort of very slow building up opening. It doesn't go for broke quickly. It's quite a subtle opening with lots of plenty of nuances. So after e4, it's obvious I've got d5 under control, so he now goes for the dark squares with d6. So again, he's keeping open the option of e5 or c5. Both are playable. Knight ge2 is always played in the Botvinnik, so may as well play it now. Knight c6. So now what he's done is he's told me, in a way, that he's not going to move that c-pawn, which is okay. That's perfectly okay. He hasn't made a mistake. But now I don't need to worry about King's Indian defense where black plays c6 and knight bd7. And I don't need to worry about a symmetrical English where he would play c5. So I'm pretty certain he's going to play e5 soon. And there are several options here. I don't castle just yet, because if I do, bishop e6 can be quite annoying, as after I defend it with d3, queen d7 could set up a queen and bishop battery where his bishop would come to h3 and trade off bishops. Which, I know, it's a small thing, but in the English I like the g2 bishop. It can be very powerful later on. So I play d3 immediately. So if bishop e6, I can play h3 first and then castle. And that will stop the queen and bishop battery being so effective. And here, I think he makes a mistake. I think he should play e5, which is always played in the King's Indian, so you may as well play it. But here he chooses an optional move, as I've said. I think this is Chess for Tigers, actually, again. It might not be, it might be another source. now that I think about it, it might be Hartson's book actually, Better Chess, where it says play the obvious before the optional, meaning play the moves you must play before the optional sideline moves, because then your opponent will have a clearer plan. And he plays a6 here. Now, the reason I say this is a mistake is that in the English, one of the main plans is to attack on the queen side. And what usually happens is that Black's bishop on g7 is aiming along the long diagonal, and White really wants to move the b-pawn up the board and put pressure on the queen side. But the rook on a1 could potentially be threatened in the future by the bishop. So the move I play, which is logical, is rook b1. And if he'd have played e5 instead, Black would now have the option of either playing a6, allowing me to play b4, and then trying to stop me playing b5, and maybe even he could play b5 himself, or he could play a5, preventing me playing b4 without first playing a3, and then after I play b4 and we both take, Black would have the open a file, and I would have pressure on the b file. And you could argue that Black's rook is better than mine. But here, playing a5 wouldn't really make much sense, because he would be a tempo down, as it would take, he'd have moved the a-pawn twice. So it's let me work out a better plan for myself without needing to worry about his other options. So he now plays bishop g4, and I didn't play h3 because I thought that after bishop takes, if queen takes, knight d4 could be annoying, followed up by c5, and if I do knight takes, I feel that I'm moving the knights around a bit too much, because I would then have to probably move the knight back to c3 to control d5, I mean. So I felt like he would make my pieces slightly uncoordinated. So I played f3, bishop d7, and now, normally you don't play bishop e3 without having played a move that stops knight g4, which can be annoying. So I can first play b4 to seize control of the queen side, and the computer here says b5 is good for Black, but I'm not so sure, because it does create tension on the queen side, which is what White wants. White wants to have activity on the queen side. So, for example, if I castle and he takes, all the play is on the queen side, which favours White. So I think the computer the computer analysis doesn't take into account long-term plans and strategies. It sees a lot of tactics, and it does have, don't get me wrong, it does have a lot of positional features that it considers, but there is, again, the horizon effect, where the computer can't see, it can't see 10 moves ahead, so it doesn't take into account how the position will evolve. And here, I like White. Okay, I'm a pawn down, but after, say, this position, I seem to have all the play here. I've got a passed a-pawn, good queenside control, Black is being squashed by my space advantage, and yeah, I've just got so much pressure that I think White is winning here by quite a big margin. Just to show you how the position would evolve, so I don't trust the computer's analysis there. So instead of b5, e5 is played. Again, the main move in King's Indian. It sort of has to be played to take control of dark squares. So here we have an interesting position already. White has succeeded in one of his 3 pawn breaks, the b4 pawn break. giving white a small space advantage, possibly. And the other two thematic pawn breaks are d4 and f4, breaking on the dark squares. But I haven't yet fully developed, whereas you could argue black has. Okay, the rooks and queen haven't moved, but the king's castle and all four minor pieces have moved. So I play bishop e3, knight h5, because if we go back a move, what is black's plan here? I've already said b5 does look a little suspect because of the whole theme of playing on the queen side. And in the King's Indian, black wants to attack on the king's side. Now, I can't see a way to really improve his pieces very much. So what is there? Pawn push. There's a thematic move, f5. So while the computer doesn't consider knight h5 for a long time, it's a move that a human would see very quickly, because your main plan is to play f5. So knight h5, perfectly logical. And I can't really prevent f5, because if I play g4, I really don't like my position after knight f4. Looks very, very strong for black. And my knight on c3, remember, would be under attack by his bishop if I took his knight and he recaptured. So I'm not winning a pawn. Just to quickly show, knight f4, I might need to take with the bishop, pawn takes, and if I do knight takes f4, my knight on c3 is hanging. So after I castle, I think maybe even g5 would be good for black here, or f5, possibly f5, just to create lots of activity on the king side. So I really like black's position there. Going back, so g4 is not an option, but here I don't castle just yet. I improve my pieces. One of the to use a friend of mine's phrases, there's a weakness of the last move that black has played knight h5 to allow f5, but the knight on f6 was guarding a key square, d5. So I can play knight d5 now and not worry about black taking and doubling my pawns. f5 kind of has to be played to continue on the plan and make knight h5 a good move. And again, I could castle, but f4 looks quite good for black. That's a very thematic move. It doesn't really matter, even if black gives up a pawn. Often the two bishops having a lot of squares under their influence. e5 is free for the black knight, and the knight on h5 can just spring into life and jump onto f4, as well as the black queen and rook having a lot of potential. So it's a very good pawn sack, which indicates to me that I need to stop it being so powerful. So I play queen d2. So I haven't yet committed to castling. I may not even castle in this game, because the centre isn't really opened up, so my king should be safe. And I could even put the king onto d1 and then c2 and attack on the king side if I needed to. But the other move I'd looked at very briefly was e takes f5, g takes, castles. But again, f4 is very strong. And just to illustrate this, takes, takes, knight takes, knight takes, knight takes, rook e8 to attack the bishop, rook e1, takes, takes, bishop, pins, and now black's pieces just spring into life, and I think I'm worse already. I defend the rook. Black could put pressure on me. I'll defend. The knight jumps to e5, so already the pieces are becoming very strong. I don't think I have time for knight takes c7 because rook f8 would look very strong. So rook f1, threatening f4, queen h6, defend the rook because of c6 coming up, and try and reroute the knight maybe to e4. But again, look at black's pieces, they're so active. And now there are lots of threats around my king side as well. So while I don't think I would get checkmated, things certainly look pretty bad for white here. So having a look at this position, white is a pawn down and black's pieces are still way more active. So I think I was right not to go into that line, not to go against my instincts. Going back. So I don't play e takes f5, and if I play f4, I feel like, as I haven't castled yet, that's opening up a little bit too much of the centre. So I play queen d2, and here f4 doesn't have such an effect. So he holds off and plays bishop e6, but the move to look at is f takes e4. Which I was seriously looking at in the game, because if I take with the f-pawn, I can't castle. So I would have taken with the d-pawn, knight f6, castles, bishop e6, rook fd1, and after, say, queen d7 and a4, I can't help feeling that white has an advantage, because even though my pawn chain it's not quite a fully good pawn chain, because I don't have a pawn on g2 defending f3 and e4, so it's known as a diseased pawn chain, according to some. My bishop's doing that job, and I don't really need to open up the king side at all. I can just leave the pawns as they are. I can't see any sacrifice that black can do, which means that I have free reign to operate on the queen side and gain an advantage over there. And that's where the main battle will take place, as well as not having a backward d-pawn as well. So going forward a couple of moves, I'm gaining lots of space on the queen side, and black would probably have to take to free up some space for the pieces. And now I can just do a minority attack and have a very good structure for myself. So here I would love to have this position as white. This looks practically winning. All my pieces pointing over at the queen side. So going back again, queen d2. So bishop e6 was played, and now I finally castle. So it only took me about 14 moves to achieve that. And I still had about 40 minutes left on my clock, as opposed to his about 15 minutes left for the next 16 moves. So we're only halfway to move 30, really. And rook f7, I can't help feeling was a bit of a blunder. I think the reason for it was to guard c7, and that would allow the queen to perhaps move to e8 or something. I wasn't quite sure what the point was. There's also bishop f8 as well, and then knight g7 to try and target the light squares. But that's very, very slow maneuvering, and the trouble is that because of the tension in the centre, white can open up the centre at almost any point to use the better piece coordination. So here I play e takes f5. And here black only really has one option. If bishop or rook takes f5, can you see what I would play? Yeah, I can fork the pieces on on h5 and f5 by playing g4. So I'd win a piece for a pawn, really. So not that good. So here he can't take the knight on d5 with the bishop, because after c takes d5, I'm winning a pawn. I know I've got doubled isolated pawns, not good, but my space advantage is so overwhelming that, and also I could play d4 and get liquidate pawns to just have an isolated pawn. So I would have far more advantages than weaknesses in that line. So he has to take on f5 with the g pawn, and now I improve my pieces and prevent his threats with playing f4. So now black can't play f4 anymore. He can't try and gain a space advantage or sack a pawn or anything interesting. I'm defending d5 with the bishop, so my g2 bishop has come to life, as it often does in the English. The longer the game goes on, the more powerful it can become. So it's exerting pressure now along the long diagonal. Knight on d5 is very good, and my knight on e2 is controlling those dark squares. And also his knight on h5 is looking a little weak and pointless. So he improves it with knight f6. And here, what I decide to do is take on e5. The reason for this is that if he recaptures with the knight, I can then play knight e2 to f4, and I'm blockading his isolated bishop's pawn. So my pawn structure there is very, very strong, with him having a weaker set of pawns, me having a good set of pawns. And if, as he does in the game, d takes, he now has hanging pawns, which I have done a video on. And again, hanging pawns can be good, because they can sometimes give you the space that you need to maneuver your pieces and create some initiative. But here, I couldn't help feeling that my pieces were the ones with the attack, the initiative, the better coordination, the threats. So his pieces are going to be forced into a corner, and I can target those two pawns, because if one of them moves forward, the other one will become backward and weak. So I play bishop g5 to pin the knight, queen d7. Now I improve the knight on e2, which generally has a hard life, so I put it on c3. And here I don't like the move he played in the game, rook d8. It just goes into a self-pin. But at this point, he was down to about 3 minutes on his clock for the last 10 moves or so, and I had about half an hour. And I saw a tactic and I played it, but the better move was b5. b5 was something I glanced at but underestimated. It's a very good move, actually, because if b takes, then rook takes, hitting b7. And if knight e7, which is the computer recommendation, I can take, and then rook b7 is very strong, and black's pieces are so cramped that white clearly has an advantage. In the line that a computer line, which I looked at, black was possibly sort of just about able to draw. He'd be a pawn down, but might have some compensation. But I would hate to have this in an over-the-board game due to the psychological pressure and also the only having a few minutes left on the clock. So I didn't play b5, but it was stronger. I played knight takes f6, check. And after bishop takes f6, can you see what I played in this position? Yeah, when one knight had left d5, but another one there. So the theory behind this is that the f6 bishop was going to have to move. Where to is more of an open question. It can move to e7, and then I can take on e7 with check, and after knight takes, I could take on b7, but that wasn't going to be my idea. I was just thinking of playing b5 actually after bishop e7. And if he takes on my knight on d5, I have bishop takes bishop, and then I'm pinning his rook on f7 to the king, so I'll win the exchange. And the move he played, bishop takes g5, helps me out in my attack with queen takes check. And the best move according to the computer is king h8, but I've clearly got a good advantage here. The computer doesn't think of it as being that good, but I think it's very strong, particularly when black is under so much pressure. So he plays rook g7, and the move I considered but didn't play was knight f6 check. After king h8, I can swap queens, and then where can the knight go? Yeah, the knight can go to c5. The other move is bishop takes c6 immediately, and then pawn takes and knight c5. But here I can do it with this move order. But I wasn't so sure I liked that move. I thought b5 might be stronger. But after analysing this position for a little while, I saw that knight d4 I could perhaps take and then go back. But I saw that f4 looked quite strong for black, even though there aren't that many pieces left on the board. So I rejected this line because even though I can maybe survive, I felt that black had some good compensation here. So I kept the queens on and played queen h6. So one of the things that I like doing, and that you'll see a lot of masters doing in their games, something I've learned from them, although I can't do it as well as they can, is like knight f6 was a threat in terms of swapping down and perhaps winning a pawn. But what I've done now by moving the queen is I've left knight f6 as a killer threat. If black doesn't do something, he'll lose the queen. But I'm also threatening a lot of other things. There's knight takes c7, potentially. If, say, queen f7, I could play knight takes c7, queen takes c7, queen takes bishop on e6 check. So that might not be possible in the next move, but it could be in the near future. There's queen takes e6, of course, if the black queen moves too far away over the next couple of moves. There's also moving my knight and then playing bishop d5 or bishop takes c6. I have b5 as a threat. And I've also got a few moves targeting his pawns on e5 and f5. So there are lots of things in the air here. And he plays king h8, which is the best move. And at this point, there are about 5 moves left of the time control. I had about 25 minutes, and he had about 1 minute, I think. So the next few moves aren't exactly the best on the board, but they illustrate how the position evolves. I play king h1 just to avoid any queen d4 checks. So, for example, if I played knight takes c7, one move that would just win for him would be possibly just rook g6, and then taking my knight. So the other move I thought of was Queen d4 check if I did that, and then after King h1, he might have a lot of compensation there anyway. So Queen d4 check could be annoying. So I just get the king off the line. Knight d4, good move. It puts the knight on a central square. And now I feel that my queenside attack is sort of over, really. I mean, it never really got underway very much, but I feel that here there's no point really pushing pawns on the queen side, because the king side and the centre are far more urgent matters to attend to. There seems to be a lot of activity going on there. So I play rook b to e1, attacking the pawn, c6, knight f6, queen d6. So he's defending just with his pieces. And okay, I've got some active play, but I decide to try and win the pawn with knight h5, rook g6, and rerouting the queen to e3. And now the position looks pretty good for me. There is, again, he was down to very low low times. He was down to maybe 30 seconds at this point for the last couple of moves. So he thought he saw a tactic, knight c2, but why doesn't that work? Yeah, I take with check. Queen takes e5 check. So he has to take. He doesn't have to take, but I can escape this. I can move the rook next turn. So he does take queens, and then instantly bashes out rook takes d3. And this was move 30, so we reached time control, and rather amusingly, we then set the clocks back 15 minutes. So he was now on 16 minutes, and I was on about 40. And then my next move, move 31, forced him to resign. Can you see what I played here? Okay, 5 seconds. Yeah, triple fork, knight f4. So here he can't stop from losing at least the exchange. Maybe the best move is bishop takes c4 here, but I feel that with my sort of pieces as well, then I'm not in a bad position with my piece coordination. So I can just play maybe knight takes d3, bishop takes, and then rook d1. So the move that he perhaps could have played to just about keep him in the game was bishop g8. Now maybe rook back to b1. Rook g d6. Bishop f1. Knight d4. Knight f4. And this was as far as I did analyse up to this point. I spent a few minutes on move 29. When I played queen takes e5 check. I'd analysed the game to about this point, and I thought here that I was still winning. I was still sort of proving that I had an advantage, but it was going to be still quite a long fight to win this, because there are still lots of pieces on the board, and the pawn advantage is a backward d pawn. But on the plus side, his pawns on the king side are isolated and can be quite weak, and I'm blockading them. So I hope you like this game and you took something from it. I suppose the main thing would just be that in openings, play the obvious before the optional, to use the phrase, or play the moves you know you're going to play before making the choices, the optional moves, and that will usually help you better form a plan of what you want to achieve and do in the opening. So comment, like, subscribe. I hope you like the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay, bye.